Imagine our world was fundamentally different in two ways. First, let us imagine we were living in a world where the leadership of the private, public, and nonprofit sectors spoke at least one other language as fluently as their own native language, being able to negotiate in some of the most spoken languages in the world. Second, let us imagine we were living in a nation where the core K-12 curriculum was composed of two languages, that nation's native language and also Spanish or Mandarin or Russian. In fact, imagine that same nation was planning to expand its educational system from bilingual to trilingual. Impossible, you would say, learning in 2, 3 languages at the same time. That's crazy. What if learning a second or even a third language was a learning method rather than a discipline? A learning method that would even help in the overall learning process. And what if what defined a nation's signature education was no longer a single language education, but a multilingual educational system composed of one common language and several additional languages? Let us ponder for a while on the connection between nation and language to see how they interact in building a global nation. A nation is an imagined community. We often refer to our cultural heritage as a nation, yet nations are lawfully recognized typically through their political dimension, the state. However, the cultural imagined dimensions are so important that they have secured a hyphenated name, nation-states. In spite of its importance in defining who we are or where we belong, nations are not an exclusionary concept. In fact, nations are so inclusive that they allow for multiple identities to coexist. I'm Portuguese. I can say I belong to the Portuguese nation as much as anyone with Portuguese ascendancy. Or I can say I belong to the broader Lusophone nation composed of Portuguese-speaking countries. A Native American can be a member of the Blackfeet Nation and a member of the American nation. So nations have always sought a more exclusive concept and creating strong relations with more exclusive concepts or more exclusive sources of identity, such as language. Language is an exclusionary concept. Language is incredibly exclusionary. Se eu de repente começasse a falar português, ia excluir quase todas as pessoas que estão nesta sala. Podia dizer o que quisesse, sabendo que só quem entende português ia perceber. It is uncomfortable to be excluded from a community of language, isn't it? However, there are over 200 million people in the world who could have just understood what I said. What if I had just said that I would give $1 million to the first person to come to the stage? Sir, you can go back to your seat. That's not what I said. Language is a single identity concept. One language is one identity, forming one community. Speaking Portuguese may allow me to understand Spanish and Italian, but I would never identify myself with the Spanish-speaking community or the Italian-speaking community unless I actually spoke those languages fluently. The notion of one nation, one language, which is the birthmark of so many nations, is the ideal imagined community that most nations want to be. Language helps nations building a stronger sense of community by expressing cultural coherence. As in the case of the Lusophone nation and Portuguese language, or in the case of the United States having all 50 states speaking the same language. Over the last few decades, something changed in the world. A complete change of paradigm occurred with capitalism outrunning government regulations and opening up economies. Globalization happened. Industries moved their production onto other nations. And people all over the world followed production lines and financial markets and trade centers. And they follow them across mountains and oceans, and they follow them across languages, so they could have more opportunities and eventually a better life. This global movement of people, capital, goods, and services pushed nations into becoming multilingual. Language is no longer only seen as a symbol of protectionism. It is a symbol of openness, of cultural, political, and economic openness. Capitalism pushed multilingualism onto nations. And multilingualism created opportunities for nations to improve the way they deal with problem solving and conflict resolution in a more interconnected world. And how? Well, multilingualism has a positive impact on IQ levels, creativity, and mental flexibility. Studies indicate that students in dual language immersion programs tend to outperform their monolingual peers. Bilingualism has also been associated with enhanced cognitive performance. Here in Montana, language immersion programs in the Blackfoot language have shown similar results with Native American kids. At a very young age, usually before 8 to 10 years old, when immersed in one or more foreign languages for a significant amount of time, children not only become multilingual, but they do it in record time. My son, João, when he was in kindergarten, became bilingual in less than 1 year after we moved from Boston to Lisbon. He even kept the Boston accent for a while after we returned to Portugal. Advanced nations see learning world languages as key to economic growth and to conflict resolution, because they understand the role of multilingualism in developing possibilities to deal with complexity. Several governments are already reacting to this reality. In Australia, businesses were encouraged to set quotas on the number of employees they hire who can speak an Asian language, to motivate students to learn those languages. England now requires all students to take a second language starting in elementary school, because the British government realized English students had lower second language skills when compared to their European peers. In China, schools are implementing bilingual programs starting in kindergarten, and they're developing study abroad programs at all levels of the educational system. Here in Missoula, there are several language immersion programs, one right down the street. Language is no longer seen as a cultural shield. Nations are moving into seeing language as human capital. Imagine a world where the most advanced nations had multilingual educational systems producing a more open-minded leadership composed of better problem solvers and conflict mediators. A world where in places like Kumamoto or Jinan, Missoula, language immersion programs and global curricula were no longer innovative, but standard examples of a much-needed education, an education for the global century. Thank you.